Did you know that there is a secret stash of 400 million bottles of alcohol hidden somewhere in America? Alcohol has been part of human life for thousands of years, and despite all the bad it can bring, people just cannot stop drinking. So when the United States decided to ban alcohol in 1920, they probably thought they would be doing humanity a favor. But they couldn't have been more wrong. In this video, we will look at the true story of Prohibition in USA, from how it started to how it ended, including some facts you probably didn't know. So, stay tuned. Prohibition was a nationwide ban on the sale, possession, and transportation of alcoholic beverages within the United States. It lasted from 1920 to 1933. The 18th Amendment to the Constitution prohibited the manufacture, sale, or transportation of alcoholic beverages, while the Volstead Act of 1919 enforced the 18th Amendment and defined what was considered an alcoholic beverage. Although the amendment was passed in 1919, it was not ratified until 1920, and it wasn't until January 17, 1920 that Prohibition went into effect. Interestingly, many states had already outlawed the sale and consumption of alcohol before the national Prohibition era began. For example, in 1913, 26 states had laws prohibiting the sale of alcohol. And by 1919, 21 states had completely banned alcohol. But despite all this, the country was still producing over 600 million gallons of alcohol per year. Although there were many reasons why Prohibition was introduced, one of the most important was because of the temperance movement. This was a campaign to limit or ban the consumption of alcohol. Supporters of this movement called themselves the temperance movement. They believed that alcohol was the cause of many social problems, like poverty, crime, and domestic violence. The women's suffrage movement was also a major factor in introducing Prohibition. Women were at the forefront of the fight against alcohol because they saw firsthand how it destroyed their families. They wanted to protect their children from the evils of alcohol and also protect themselves from abusive husbands who drank too much. In fact, 80% of the women who attended the 1913 Women's Christian Temperance Union Convention were suffragists. However, perhaps the most important factor leading up to the Prohibition was World War I. The war caused food and fuel shortages, which made it difficult to produce and distribute alcohol. This led to the closing of many breweries and distilleries, which in turn led to the introduction of Prohibition. Now that we know how Prohibition started, let us see how it impacted people's lives. For the first few years of Prohibition, people seemed to go on as usual. Many people simply ignored the law and continued to drink and buy alcohol. Organized crime also flourished during this time because there was now a large demand for illegal alcohol. This led to the rise of gangs and violence on the streets. For example, Al Capone was a notorious gangster who made millions selling illegal alcohol during this time. Also, the police were often bribed to look the other way when illegal alcohol was being sold. Furthermore, many politicians were also involved in organized crime and helped to legalize gambling, which further increased the amount of crime in society. The worst part of all of this was that the majority of Americans did not support Prohibition. In fact, a survey conducted in 1928 found that only 19% of Americans supported Prohibition. Despite all the negative effects, it continued until 1933. There are many reasons why Prohibition failed. One of the main reasons was that the government could not control the production and sale of alcohol. People simply found ways around the law and continued to drink. Additionally, the government did not have enough resources to enforce the law, so criminals were able to make a fortune selling illegal alcohol. Finally, people became tired of the crime and violence that was associated with Prohibition. They wanted their neighborhoods back, and they were willing to do whatever it took to get it. So in December 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the 21st Amendment, which repealed the 18th Amendment and ended Prohibition. However, despite all the problems associated with Prohibition, there are some people who still think that it was a good idea. They argue that it reduced the amount of alcohol-related problems such as poverty, crime, and domestic violence. They also argue that it gave women more rights and made workplaces safer. However, these are all short-sighted arguments because all these things could have been achieved without banning alcohol. Prohibition only led to more crime, violence, and corruption. One of the most interesting aspects of Prohibition was the way people got around the law. People became very creative in the ways they hid and transported alcohol. For example, some people used to hide alcohol in piano cases or under false bottoms in cars. Others would smuggle alcohol in from Canada or Mexico. There was even a type of boat called a moonshine boat that was used to transport alcohol illegally. These boats were usually small and fast, so they could easily outrun the authorities. During Prohibition, people also became very creative in the ways they made alcohol. Moonshine, also known as White Lightning or Mountain Dew, was a cheap and strong type of whiskey that was made illegally during this time. Farmers and mountain dwellers who had been distilling their own whiskey for years were called moonshiners. They would often sell their product to bootleggers who would then sell it to bars and restaurants. There are many stories about moonshine and moonshiners during this time. One of the most famous moonshiners was Marvin Shirley. He was known as the fastest moonshiner in America because he could outrun the police every time they tried to catch him. Another famous moonshiner was Jim Tom Hedrick. He was known for his elaborate still that he used to make moonshine. The still was hidden in a cave, and it was so well hidden that the police never found it. During Prohibition, there was also a lot of confusion over what types of alcohol were illegal. Beer and wine were generally okay, but hard liquor was not. However, the government did not want to get involved in telling people how much they could drink. So they passed laws that made it illegal to manufacture, sell, or transport any type of alcoholic beverage. This led to a lot of confusion, and people were often arrested for simply drinking too much beer. For example, in 1925, 7 men were arrested for drinking more than 3 bottles of beer in public. They were charged with public intoxication and had to pay fines of up to $1,000 each. Another interesting aspect of Prohibition was the way people got their alcohol during this time. Before Prohibition, people could simply walk into a bar or store and buy alcohol. But during Prohibition, they had to find other ways to obtain it. One way was to buy it from a bootlegger. Bootleggers were people who sold illegal alcohol from their homes or businesses. People would often have to pay cash for the alcohol, and they had no guarantee that it was safe. Another way people got their alcohol was through organized crime. As we mentioned earlier, organized crime flourished during Prohibition because there was a large demand for illegal alcohol. Gangs and mobs sold alcohol through a network of bars, restaurants, and speakeasies. Speakeasies were illegal bars or clubs that sold alcohol. They were often hidden in basements or back rooms, and people had to have a password to get in. Finally, people could also get their alcohol from blind pigs. Blind pigs were illegal bars that sold beer and liquor. They were called blind pigs because the owners had to keep the windows covered so the police couldn't see inside. During Prohibition, people were arrested for breaking the law. The punishment for selling or transporting alcohol was a fine of up to $1,000 or 5 years in prison. The punishment for buying or possessing alcohol was a fine of up to $500 or 6 months in jail. However, the police were often corrupt, and they sometimes let people break the law if they paid them off. As we mentioned earlier, Prohibition failed because people simply did not follow the rules. People continued to drink and buy alcohol even though it was illegal. This led to a lot of crime and violence, and people eventually became tired of it. In December 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the 21st Amendment, which repealed the 18th Amendment and ended Prohibition. Now that you know the true story of Prohibition, what do you think? Do you think it was a good thing or a bad thing? Let us know in the comments below. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Thanks for watching.